In the world of intelligence, a turned agent or a sold secret is a massive headache, but it's a known quantity. Agencies have procedures to contain the damage. But a mole operating at the very peak of the command structure bypasses those safeguards entirely. Harold Adrian Russell Philby, known to his friends as Kim, was the head of MI6's anti-Soviet Section 9. He was literally the man in charge of British intelligence operations against the Soviet Union. From this position, he had complete access to the most sensitive intelligence shared between Britain and the United States during the earliest, most paranoid years of the Cold War. He was also a Soviet spy. Recruited in 1934, before he had any intelligence role, he spent nearly 30 years feeding everything Moscow needed to know directly back to his handlers, completely undetected. How did the best spy hunters in the world, the architects of Western counterintelligence, look at the man leading their own anti-Soviet department and completely miss his true allegiance? Before we look at how Philby hid, we must look at what his access actually cost. After World War II, Western agencies aggressively tried to establish resistance networks behind the Iron Curtain. Between 1949 and 1952, the CIA and MI6 jointly targeted Albania, aiming to destabilize the brutal Stalinist dictatorship of Enver Hoxha. They trained Albanian exiles and sent them back to build an underground resistance. Every single infiltration attempt failed. The teams were met with immediate ambushes upon arrival. The men sent in were captured or killed almost instantly. The operation was run from London and Washington, where Philby held a key liaison position. He intercepted the joint planning data and warned his Soviet handlers in advance, giving Albanian state security the exact coordinates to set their traps. The losses in Albania highlight a grim reality of intelligence work. The cost of a breached operation is measured in the lives of specific individuals who walked into traps they never saw coming. To understand why Philby avoided suspicion despite his proximity to these disasters, you have to look at the cultural environment of mid-century British intelligence. At the time, MI6 was essentially a closed ecosystem, heavily reliant on the Old Boys network. It was staffed largely by men who shared the exact same public school and university backgrounds, creating an atmosphere of presumed mutual trust. That trust cracked in 1951, when two of Philby's former Cambridge classmates, Donald Maclean and Guy Burgess, defected to the Soviet Union. Because Burgess had been living in Philby's house in Washington, heavy circumstantial suspicion immediately landed on Philby. The CIA was highly suspicious. But within MI6, Philby's elite background, a Cambridge education, his father's status as an imperial civil servant, acted as a shield. His British peers simply assumed that someone of his class and pedigree would never commit treason. This institutional arrogance created a systemic vulnerability. Hard circumstantial evidence was effectively neutralized by the comfortable assumption that one of their own couldn't possibly be a traitor. But Philby didn't rely solely on his colleagues' biases. From the moment he was recruited by Soviet talent spotters at Cambridge in the 1930s, he proactively built an airtight cover identity. He was an outspoken socialist as a student. To protect him, his Soviet handlers instructed him to publicly disavow those beliefs and meticulously build a credible anti-communist conservative persona. He executed this flawlessly. He traveled to cover the Spanish Civil War as a journalist, deliberately aligning with Franco's nationalist forces to establish unassailable right-wing credentials. His most effective operational asset, however, was psychological. He possessed an extraordinary ability to compartmentalize. The warm, intellectually engaging colleague who formed deep, genuine friendships within MI6 was the exact same man passing their secrets to Moscow. When he faced official questioning and eventually a public inquiry in 1955, he survived without high-tech gadgets or elaborate alibis. He weaponized his own charm, leaning on the severe cognitive dissonance his friends experienced when trying to view him as an enemy. By 1963, Philby had been officially cleared, but the suspicion never fully evaporated. He was living in Beirut, working under the cover of a journalist, a man operating in a twilight state, trusted by neither side. That year, concrete intelligence from a new Soviet defector finally proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Cornered by a senior MI6 officer sent to confront him, Philby offered a partial confession. The British government preferred to avoid the massive public scandal of putting a former senior intelligence officer on trial. Philby exploited this hesitation. Before any formal arrangement could be finalized, he slipped away and boarded a Soviet ship in Beirut harbor. He spent the rest of his life in Moscow. He was given the rank of colonel in the KGB, awarded the Order of Lenin, and lived until 1988, outlasting the Cold War he had spent decades trying to manipulate. Philby's legacy exposes a permanent vulnerability within any tight-knit organization. The specific qualities required to be a deeply trusted, highly effective colleague are exactly the same qualities that make the perfect traitor.